Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is our, our first sort of webinar on the critical issue of reopening our workplaces, which is occupying all of our minds, I think, at the moment over the course of the last couple of weeks. I think most of you will be familiar with Growth Platform, but for those who aren't, we're effectively the City Region's growth company. We're established by the Local Enterprise Partnership and the Combined Authority to support the business community of the Liverpool City region, working very closely with our professional colleagues across the sector, from property through our finance and legals right across, but also with local authorities and with chambers of commerce and other business support organisations, Professional Liverpool and the likes, in a sort of very much bringing together the whole of the business support ecosystem across the city region. This is a subject matter that is clearly exercising all of us right now, since the Prime Minister's announcement 10 days or so ago. We've all been trying to adjust to what he said and then what was written, the two things not always being completely aligned. But what's emerging is much greater clarity now on the challenge of reopening our workplaces. And I think what we've found, because we've been looking at ourselves as an organisation, as you start, it's a little bit like peeling an onion. Once you've realised that you're thinking about doing that, there's a huge amount to be taken on board to do that safely. Economically, I guess our position is clear here. We really need to make sure that we keep all of our staff safe, all of our colleagues, stakeholders, partners, customers, clients, wherever, the general public. We need to start by ensuring we keep them safe and work to the guidelines. But it's absolutely vital that our economies really do start working. We've had some serious challenges here in this city region as across the UK, and that's only going to continue over the coming weeks and months. We know what some of the challenges will be economically for us. It's vital that we find a way of getting our economy working, but doing that productively and in as safe a way as possible. So who better to help us get our heads around how we do that in a way than probably the UK's foremost property organisation, and that's CBRE. Delighted to be joined by a team from CBRE, and I'll introduce them in a moment. But just so everyone knows the kind of format for today, we'll spend the first half an hour or so with Kate Smith, the Head of Workplaces UK for CBRE, and the team, and including some well-known local faces in Neil Kirkham and Neil Rogers and Jenny Smith, the kind of local and regional team. And then after we've heard from CBRE, we'll look to take a couple of questions. Please, if you have specific questions, post them for the team. We'll try and ask them one or two of those. I doubt we'll have much time for much more. But the team have agreed to try and answer any questions subsequently. So if you post a question, we'll record it and we'll make sure that we try and get an answer back to you directly at some point afterwards. We'll then hand over to close colleagues of ours in the Combined Authority, Gary Evans and Hugh Jenkins, who were responsible for policy on transport for the city region. Because obviously, whilst the workplace is vital for us in this getting back to work environment, also getting to and from the workplace is equally critical and has been a focus of a lot of attention. And Hugh and Gary will talk us through some of the issues that they're dealing with and how they're tackling that. Again, hopefully a chance for one or two questions for Hugh and Gary. And then we'll finish with asking you some questions based on what you've seen to get your response. And then the aim is by 4:30, we should be able to wrap up. So fast moving, lots to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to look to hand over to Kate. One thing I must just say, so you're aware, if you do choose to participate, and put questions, etc., is that this webinar will be recorded. So if you do happen to say anything, put a question forward. It may well form part of this recording, just so that you're aware of that. So without further ado, Kate, pleasure to introduce you and hear what you and the team have got to say. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. So as Mark said, I'm Kate Smith. I'm the head of workplace for CBRE in the UK. I'm going to talk for a short while around occupiers' perspective, what occupiers are doing, planning the reopening of the workplace, then hand over to my colleague Neil to talk about project management and construction, the other Neil to talk about the local market perspective, and then finally to Jenny to talk about the landlord's perspective. So from an occupier perspective, just thinking about the timeline to act. Universally, people have fed back to me, and occupiers are feeding back that actually working remotely has worked remarkably well for them in many, many cases. And actually, we're now starting to think about how do we reopen the workplace, but also at the same time sustain remote working for many office occupiers. And that period can be anything potentially 12, 18 months. We just don't know until we are in a post-vaccine or post-herd immunity. So we need to consider what the return to the workplace looks like, and also how we sustain remote working for those who can't come back into the workplace. And actually the sentiment is very strong across occupiers that when we do come back post-vaccine or post-herd immunity, that it's an opportunity for transformation. There's a horrible phrase of the new normal, which I'll try not to use, but it is an opportunity for many organisations to think about coming back and doing things differently and better from a workplace perspective, but across them all. And I will caveat what I'm going to take you through is every organisation is different, every building is different. So whilst I can give you some guidance here, you will need to undertake your own risk assessment and your own process review and so on to reopen your own buildings. First kind of point of note is obviously not everyone is suited to home working. And although this is a bit of a joke in the cartoon, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week. So it is a situation that's not entirely positive for all of our colleagues. So making sure you understand how remote working is working for your organisation. One way to do that is to do a survey and really understand how employees are feeling about it and what more you might need to do to help them continue to work remotely. This is a busy slide, but a really useful one, and I will make sure that the slides are shared with you afterwards. This is reopening your workplace in one slide. So the first piece to do is to start to think about employee profiling. So who in your team is in group A? So they are office dependent or workplace dependent. They really need to go back to the office to do their job, whether that's because they rely on being in the office for access to equipment or tools, or actually their home working environment is not sustainable. Then we go through the office preferred and the flexible, which will be the majority likely. And then you will have a high risk group. So a group, whether that's someone with an underlying health condition themselves or with someone in their family, or perhaps with a partner or someone who lives with them who is a frontline medical worker. And that group of people are unlikely to be able to return to the workplace until we are in that post-vaccine or post-herd immunity stage. So long-term remote working. Once we understand the profile of an organisation, you can start scenario planning. The majority of occupiers that I'm talking to are thinking about a staggered or staged return to work. So starting with scenario one, you can see there, looking at a skeleton reoccupation of just those people who absolutely need to be in the office. And then planning a phased return to work beyond that for the wider population. Most are looking at around a 20% occupation in phase one, but at the same time, looking at the space section, so the section below the dotted line, and starting to understand what the supply of space could look like. So that's looking at every floor plan and understanding how you can implement physical distancing. I prefer to call it physical distancing than social distancing, but putting that 2-meter radius around every workstation and making sure people can work appropriately physically distanced. Then thinking about the flow, making sure people know safe walkways, one staircase for up, one staircase for down, etc. Then thinking about pinch points in the building, lifts, access points, exit points. Those are going to be really difficult to manage. And that's where most organisations are starting to think, as well as with transportation considerations, perhaps we need staggered shifts in our offices, because if we try and bring everybody in at the same time, it's a pinch point for transport, but it's also a pinch point for lifts or for entry or exit points. From that point, you can match your demand in terms of the number of people you need to get back into your building with how many people you can safely bring back into the building. At the same time, you're reviewing all of your facilities management services, so working with your landlord, and you'll hear a little bit more about that from Jenny, but also looking at all of your service providers and your FM team, at how perhaps you're going to provide janitorial to an elevated level, or cleaning services, your HVAC systems, your food, if you have on-site food, how your reception services, mails, couriers, every service you have has to effectively been reviewed, and look at the customer journey. So one of the things we're also doing is looking at how you can create a more touchless office. So removing the need to touch where possible, closing communal areas if they're not necessary, such as gyms. You're not going to have those open. So a very big piece of work to understand how to reopen the office safely, and then looking at if you've got enough office space. If you don't have enough office space to safely accommodate those you need to bring back, perhaps you'll need to look at additional short-term space. And then it is massive amount of effort around communication, and communicating with all of your employees around what to expect when they come back into the office, but also how to behave. So we could create some really great spaces, safe working practices, but if people come back on autopilot and try and act the same way in the office, then all of that can be undone. So it's important to see this as change management and the importance of communication as well. I won't dwell on these. These are available for you to read, and from a playbook that we've produced that we can also share. But thinking first of all about what you need to do to sustain remote working, to understand your demand profiling. Then your FM services, what you're going to do across each of those services and how that's going to be it may impact on your cost, on your service charges as well. You may have to keep buildings running longer if you're going to consider staggered shifts. Some occupiers are thinking about a 7-day working week, so they can bring fewer people in every day. Some are doing 5 days in, 5 days out. Let me mention touch-free. There's a lot of touch-free technology, but also some basic physical adaptations you can do to the office, and equipment that you can get to look at how you remove the need for lots of people to be touching the same space. Having a look, as we mentioned, around your infrastructure, your HVAC, so understanding what fresh air intake you can improve, and asking your service provider or your landlord to support you in understanding the HVAC improvements that can be done. And then how you're going to help people around signing them on or nudging. This is an example from our office we've reopened in Spain. I think some great design work in helping people understand what their new workplace looks like, how to access it, following the dotted lines and the arrows, where to stand, etc. So, and one of the big learnings certainly now is if you do want to order these kind of things, everybody is ordering them at the same time. So just check on lead times, because these are becoming, the providers and the printers of these kind of graphics are quite overwhelmed at the moment. And lastly, before I hand over, just to consider some of the things that might change. So this is going to be a huge transformation for the workplace. I think probably one of the main things is people will be looking at resilience and saying, if this happens again or in a different way, how can we make sure our business is not impacted so much? So probably smaller HQ functions, polycentric, so reducing your co-location risk. Also thinking about a greater adoption of remote working. Just about everyone I'm talking to is thinking my employees will work from home on a greater amount. How is that going to work? How are the people in the office and the people at home going to stay connected in an equitable way? So virtual meetings will probably be a more permanent fixture of how we work going forward. And finally, workplace technology, something I really see taking off. A lot of people are seeing workplace technology as something that can help them with the reopening, but can help them through this probably elongated period of pre-vaccine working. So again, there's a lot on these slides. I will share them, and I'll hand over now to Neil, who's going to talk around construction and project management.
Just need to unmute, Neil, if you can hear me.
That was my first test. Well, hello again. My name's Neil Rogers. I head up the building consultancy and project management team in the Liverpool office for CBRE. I've just prepared a few slides today. It's just to talk through the construction projects, looking at a relatively short-term focus. We're then looking at an example of working with contractors and how do we re-engage and get them back onto site, and what does that mean for contractors. We've then just pulled together a slide to just demonstrate what that means also from a space plan exercise if you are reopening the office or plan to reopen the office. So the first slide here, so just looking at construction in the short term, focused. Long term, it's a crystal ball kind of question. We don't know what the long term looks like for the construction industry. So the focus at the moment is really to look at construction sites maintaining distancing guidelines, excuse me, and how they can be managed. Many sites have remained open. A lot more have remained closed. The ones that we've seen that have remained open, lots of activity has been delayed. We're looking at reduced labour, reduced materials. So again, it's making sure that when sites are open, that there's an effective management and plan in place, so that the procurement and the resource levels go hand in hand to maintain sufficient progress. Sorry, Kate. In terms of what we should be looking at, so we're reviewing programs. So we are sitting down with contractors, we're sitting down with developers and clients, and it's really looking at the programs and approaching it as a team. That it's a shared problem. We're all in this together. It shouldn't be the first document to pick up. Certainly shouldn't be your contract or the phone to your solicitors. And it's about collectively combating these challenges and coming up with a solution that fits that particular site and project. And then the third point there is just a little bit about reopening construction sites and what to consider. We as a practice, we've allocated a 4-step approach, and it's really looking at the government lifted restrictions. Can safe working environments be provided? Looking at the contractors, are the contractors and the supply chains willing to return to site, and is the developer willing to reopen the site and allow access? Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a document. We've got a couple of sites that have reopened in the last week. We've been sitting down with contractors, and we're really looking to scrutinise and stress testing the method statements, the risk assessments, and their approach to returning back to work. And these 5 key points are really what we're looking at with the contractors. So it's all about a risk assessment based approach and implementation of the actions. So that's talking to the contractors to understand the travel and site plans, site access points, hand washing facilities, toilet facilities, canteen arrangements. So it's all that kind of site logistics plan and understanding where the risks are and how to manage the risks out. The next task is really looking at planning and programming to ensure the physical distancing is maintained. Where it can't be maintained in some areas, it's all about enhanced PPE, face masks, gloves, all the usual stuff that you would have been well versed on over the last few weeks. Procedure if someone falls ill. So again, there should be zero tolerance if people are ill or are suffering. Then it's all about self-isolation and keeping them away from site and maintaining as much of a healthy site as can be possible. Provision of training. So again, we're really looking to see contractors develop and really introduce into their site plan a COVID specific training course. So everyone has the usual site induction. It's now extended to cover COVID scenarios and compliance. Lots of contractors now are under their own kind of costs and initiatives employing or designating a COVID site compliance officer. It's all about marshalling people, policing the COVID rules, and avoiding things like pinch points, which Kate touched on. This slide, so this now moves. So we've looked at the construction process, what's happening. We've looked at how do you reopen sites? We're now looking at what does that mean and what could that look like. This is our Manchester office, so this is CBRE's Manchester office. It is still the work in progress plan, but just as a touch point, you can see that we've considered circulation routes. So there's a one-way system around the office, so it tries to minimise collisions, tries to maintain a strict route around the office. It looks at a seat capacity whereby we maintain a 2 metre distance. We've split it into phases, so the darker green is a phase 1 reoccupation. The lighter tone of green is phase 2, and it's all about integrating people back into the workplace in a staggered way. Again, it's just simple things like meeting rooms for the first phase, breakout facilities, toilet facilities. They'll all be minimised and restricted use. Move on to the next. Okay, can we jump on to the next slide, please? So again, it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but again, it's the final slide of mine. It's just the 4 kind of key points to take away. It's as much about behavioural change than it is physical change. Physical change can be implemented, but again, it's a very short-term focus on the physical change at this moment in time. It's not, a lot of the behavioural change is going to need to be driven and managed through the business leaders, and it's looking at new ways to work and effective ways to work flexibly. Again, if you are a developer, if you're a landlord and you've got contracts in place, the message is don't panic. Speak to the experts, speak to the contractors, speak to your project management and professional team. We're all in this together and share the problem. Thanks very much. I'll pass you over to Neil Kirkham.
Thanks, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. For those that don't know me, my name's Neil Kirkham. I head up the Advisory and Transaction Services team within CBRE's Liverpool office. I'm going to give you a very quick canter through our experiences and observations since lockdown came into force at the back end of March of this year in the Liverpool office market. Now, the image that you see here is obviously the type of event that I think we're all hoping and hankering for at the moment, but I think mass gatherings like this are still a long way off, and unfortunately it is back to reality. So what have we seen since lockdown restrictions came into force? Just jump to the next slide, please, Kate. Thank you. As you can imagine, we saw quite a swift and abrupt fall in the number of new inquiries coming into the market post lockdown. But I am pleased to say that since the Prime Minister's announcement last Sunday, we have seen quite a significant increase in the number of those new inquiries coming through in the last week and a half, which I think we can all take as a huge positive as we try and drive out of the current situation. We've seen a lot of progress, particularly the larger transactions that we've been working on for a number of months, if not years in some cases. Primarily larger corporate occupiers who are driving forward those lease transactions, albeit the pace that those transactions are proceeding at are probably a little bit slower than we would ordinarily expect. So the other end of the spectrum is obviously our local SME market within Liverpool, which underpins about 85% of the Liverpool office market, and we've probably seen in the main a lot of businesses hitting the pause button here. Clearly,
addressing working from home provisions and protecting their operational business has led to them just pausing those potential relocations or office acquisitions for the time being. But again, I'm pleased to say that we haven't had a single transaction that's completely fallen out of bed yet, touch wood. So what's happened to try and facilitate some of these transactions proceeding? We've seen the introduction of what is now known as the COVID clause. This is a clause that has been incorporated into the drafting of lease documentation. And it enables a landlord and tenant to exchange on a lease contract with the condition that it is subject to the completion of that lease not occurring until such time as lockdown restrictions are lifted. Gives everybody some certainty and commits both parties to the transaction, which I think is good for all parties concerned. So that's the newer side of the transactional side of the Liverpool office market. What have we been seeing from the existing occupier side of things? So just jumping on to the next slide, we act on behalf of both investor leasing clients and occupiers at CBRE. And we've either received or we've made a number of requests for rent abatement or rent holidays since lockdown, and particularly aligned to the March quarter day, which is at the end of March. Rent holiday, whereby that quarter's rent in March is then deferred and apportioned and then repaid over the course of the next 3 or 4 quarter days, so June, September, December of this year moving forwards. Now, of course, that helps greatly in terms of a business's short-term cash flow position, but of course, that rent is then added to future quarter day rental payments, so potentially compounds the situation moving forward. So what's the alternative to that? Well, we have negotiated on behalf of a number of occupier clients what we refer to as a lease re-gear. So that can be the removal of a break option that's within a lease, or the pushing back of a lease expiry date in return for an incentive in the form of a rent-free period. So landlord receives additional term certain on that lease, and of course the tenant receives a pure rent-free period as opposed to a rent holiday and having to worry about that compounded rent moving forward. So just jump into the next one. As Kate, I think, said earlier, you know, that there really is one size does not fit all. There's no silver bullet answer to any of this. But numerous clients have been asking me, you know, what is the office market going to look like as we come out of COVID-19? Will businesses just continue to work from home? Whilst we're seeing a trend in recent years, and particularly with large corporates looking at reducing their footprint as a cost-saving exercise, and at the moment, the likes of Aviva have got 17,000 call centre operatives working from home. We've also seen a number of clients that are looking at trying to get as many of their employees back into the workplace as possible, but of course, as Neil alluded to, working at a 40 to 50% capacity means that these clients need additional footprint, and they're looking to us to acquire additional space on their behalf at the moment. So, because it's been illustrated that it's possible to work from home, you know, is that the correct approach from a productivity and a health and well-being perspective, as Kate mentioned earlier? That, of course, will differ from business to business, from department to department, and from individual to individual. And we feel that providing an environment that promotes collaboration and drives productivity will continue to be high on the agenda for both employers and employees moving forward. So, and of course, through the battle for talent, you know, that battle to attract and retain the best quality talent to your business, we've witnessed a significant shift towards buildings that provide superior facilities, amenities, and working environments. And post-COVID, and we are talking about potential post-vaccine period here, that we're anticipating that momentum will continue, as we need to provide employees with a tangible reason to come back to the office environment. So what does the future hold? We are expecting a flight to quality and a significant gap emerging between Grade B properties and Grade A buildings or offerings that can provide collaborative environments such as Baltic Creative, enhanced visitor experiences such as the newly refurbished Royal Liver building, external communal areas which have become paramount importance, and large public realm and roof terraces, and wellness provision, including cycle stores, lockers, showers, drying rooms, which provided within a number of Bruntwoods buildings in the city. So I'll now hand you over to Jenny Smith, who's just going to talk you through property management matters from a landlord's perspective.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jenny. Just for my mind on time, if we can try and keep within about 5 minutes, that would be great, just so we can try.
Don't worry, I knew I was following Neil, so I knew I'd have to be short and sweet. Thanks, Neil. Some really interesting trends. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jenny Smith. I head up property management for CBRE in the Northwest. We're responsible for managing probably the best part of around 21 million square feet in the Northwest for our clients. So hopefully I'll bring this back to kind of the here and now in terms of what's happening from a landlord's perspective. For those of you who are on the kind of cusp of starting your plan to kind of re-enter the workplace, I think really kind of as a starting point, it's fair to say landlords are taking a very pragmatic and collaborative approach. I think it's fair to say look within your own business to establish if there's a task force, a team or a lead on this, because it's really important that communication is maintained, not just kind of re-establishing the workplace, but also right throughout, because we know there's going to be changes to government guidelines, and that communication is going to be really key throughout this journey that we're all on together. So I think establish the stakeholders internally, but also externally. Who is the landlord? Who represents the landlord? And who do you need to engage with now to understand how you re-enter your workplace and how you can give your employees that comfort that you're entering a safe environment, and that the landlord's thought these things through. Thanks, Kate. In terms of those of you who've been involved in planning, you may well have already received surveys from your landlord or your landlord's agent. I know that's certainly how CBRE have approached this, and I've worked with a couple of our competitors, and that's exactly how they're approaching it. And really that's allowing us to collate information around what does it look like, is it going to be phased, how many people are coming back, likely shift patterns, and that really helps inform the property management teams in terms of creating a plan per asset. You may also find that landlords are asking for reasonable notice so that they can start to look at increasing and adapting services. Again, it's really just about two-way and ensuring that both parties are working for the greater good of the employees who are going to be using the space. Landlord and managing agents, if they haven't already, will be undertaking risk assessments of each asset. On the back of that risk assessment, what we're finding is the creation of new operational kind of protocols that really, as occupiers, you need to understand in full, and you need to be able to cascade that information and those changes in protocols to both your employees, your supply chain, and visitors to the building if so permitted. I'll give you some practical examples of those protocols and some of those changes, predominantly around things like ingress and egress, so people entering and exiting the building. So we've got buildings that we manage where, you know, we've got the benefit of, say, two staircases. A staircase is designated in and a staircase is designated out. Also in terms of vertical transportation, aka lifts. We're looking at maximum numbers in lifts at any one time to really and kind of encourage and support the social distancing measures that the government have put into place. So hopefully that gives you some kind of practicalities and how we're kind of looking at assets. Like I say, it's certainly on an asset by asset basis. So engage with the facilities management team, understand what changes are being made to those assets. So when you do start to re-enter, there's a very clear channel of communication. And moving on, I think something that I do just want to kind of bring to kind of your attention is knowing your responsibilities. So it's really important that you understand your lease terms and the responsibilities under your lease, particularly when it comes to things like health and safety. Kate touched on it early on in the process, but understanding from an M&E perspective, and making sure that your premises are fit and ready. So going back to the risk assessment, you will need to undertake a risk assessment on your own premises and then overlay that with the landlord's risk assessments. That's really, really vital. And then finally, I think it's fair to say, if you are making any adaptations to your space that require landlord's approval, make sure you're engaging on a license to alter and make sure you get that documented. And any changes to the protocol to how the building's used, make sure that subcontractors and suppliers know that that's how it's being used. And really, that's it from a landlord's perspective. I think what I would say is what's really important from both sides is communication and collaboration, and it's never been more important, really, from a landlord and occupier's perspective. And if you've got any questions, feel free to contact any of the CBRE team today, and I'll pass you back to Mark for some Q&A. Thank you.
Brilliant. What a whistle stop. So my head's spinning with so much information there. Those fantastic slides, Kate, and I know you've said kindly you'll share all of those, because that looks just like a template for what everybody needs to consider when trying to plan for a return to the workplace. Hard to try and sum all of that up in a couple of minutes, but I've just got one question. There's no questions come from the audience. I think they're too busy trying to take it all in. Lots of small businesses in our city region, as Neil sort of alluded to. How can we help them take these steps? Because I can imagine that CBRE are acting for all sorts of important and significant clients who will use your expertise to steer them through. Lots of SMEs will kind of have to do this on a self-help or a very low-cost basis. Anything we can say to them? Obviously, put the information you've shared to them, but anything is there a level of service that you guys at CBRE can offer those businesses, or how can we help them?
From my perspective, there's a playbook which we can share, which is a lot of self-service information, so we can provide that and put it on the portal. And then we do have some very accessibly priced services. So if you do just need some help doing the space planning or thinking about the building flows, they're not priced for big enterprise clients. They're what we call grab products. So yeah, very entry-level pricing to help support.
Brilliant. If you can make sure we get hold of those, we'll put them on the Growth Platform portal and make those available and push them out. And finally, just one for you, Neil Kirk. I mean, just any thoughts on where you see opportunities for perhaps inward investments, new businesses coming along? You're seeing anything of that, sort of any trend of opportunities? Because every crisis, unfortunately, does create some new opportunities, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so, Mark. And you'll be well aware of the north shoring terminology, and we've seen a number of examples of it over recent years. But I do feel that moving out of this, that we're going to probably see more of a trend in that regard, particularly as I was referring to earlier, with the larger corporates who are perhaps looking at their significant footprint in London and the costs associated with that, whether that be rental, occupational costs, but also obviously the staffing costs and lifestyle standards of living, etc., that you can achieve out in regional cities such as Liverpool. So yeah, I think that is one thing that we're going to potentially see a lot more of.
Great. A really helpful session. we could speak for another 15-20 minutes easily, and you could have taken a lot longer over your presentations. I know you've had to rush through them, and we'll perhaps take away the fact there's maybe some sense in a much more detailed workshop on some of these if people are potentially interested. But we're very interested in that issue about building in resilience for both for supply chains and for businesses, and we think that will create some real opportunities for investment. Thank you, Kate, Neil and Jenny for that. Hugely helpful and interesting. But stay with us because there's a new one question's just come in, which I'll try and pick up. What I will now do is hand over to Gary Evans and Hugh Jenkins from the Combined Authority to talk about how they're sort of looking at the challenge of transport to the workplace. Over to you guys.
Much, Mark. So to introduce myself, my name's Gary Evans. I'm the Assistant Director here at Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, and I've got the challenging job of leading the Transport Network's response to COVID-19 for the region and starting those recovery arrangements as we move forward. So if I share just a number of slides today, it'd be helpful just to try and pick up just some of the detail for you guys, just so we can just try and understand some of the complexities that face us. I'm joined by my colleague Hugh Jenkins, and Hugh will introduce himself in a moment, midway through the presentation. So our steps to recovery, and what does that mean? So we expect, as we're already in our plans, as we're starting to see, lockdown restrictions will be eased in various phases. We'll be looking for reassurance through those phases, and we recognise the key role that transport will have in the region's response and our economic recovery. For that reason, our plans, they need to be able to flex and they need to be able to respond to demand. We expect different sectors will bring different demands to that transport network as they return to a new normal and whatever that looks like, and we've got to be in a position where we're able to respond to that. But please don't underestimate, I don't want to spend lots of time today talking about it, but just around the technical and the practical details around each mode of transport. People will always say, oh, it's no problem, we can just get more rail services, or no problem, we can just get more bus services. But the technical restrictions around lots of that are quite challenging, and a lot of it does take some planning to get us to the stage where we're in. But to reassure you, we are looking at a range of evidence available to us. We have our own patronage data, which we review daily. We saw a very steep decline in that. I'm sure many of you saw the presentations at national level, but we are undertaking surveys, and Hugh will speak about those later on, just to try and understand what that new demand for our public transport and other modes of transport will be moving forward. We've got some challenges, and we have to be open and we have to be clear about those. The transport network in lots of ways has been designed to carry many people in small spaces. It is mass transport systems. So for us, the biggest challenge by far will be social distancing and maintaining that. And you'll have seen some messages already at a national level and reinforced at a local level, that while we'll try to manage social distancing and maintain it where possible, in some instances it may not always be possible. So the idea of wearing face coverings on public transport is something that is being encouraged, actively encouraged, and it's something that we're very open to both staff and the passengers to do. Our building and assets are not designed specifically for that. We're not Tesco, we're not big external retail parks. And for those who know the city, you only need to go to James Street Station, our underground station, and just try and understand exactly how we're going to act promote social distancing in such environments is going to be a challenge for us. So there's lots of challenges in there that the teams are working through. To be a bit more specific, and Hugh will talk later on about the key messages, but we're trying to promote a hierarchical approach to these. So very much it's been, if you can, currently in this recovery phase, if you can work from home, continue to do so. If you can't, then active travel, walking and cycling should be your preferred mode. It is the mode that gives us the best opportunity around social distancing. It's the good habits that we've created while we've been on lockdown. Lots of us have taken actively to cycling and walking, and it's important that we maintain those good habits as we build back into a new transport arrangements. The reallocation of some short-term measures we plan to undertake there to support that, some reallocation of road space to keep walking and cycling as safe as possible, promote and filter neighbourhoods, so it's about travelling locally and using more town centres and communities for walking and cycling measures. And you'll see some pop-up cycle hubs initially at some key worker and employment locations facilitated by the CA. But we'd ask you as employers potentially to support that too. So if you're not already aware of it, think of the Bike to Work scheme, think of secure cycling and those measures that our CBRE colleagues have just shared with you about improved storage and shower facilities and so on for your employees will all support that message. Our message around public transport for the region differs slightly than the national position. So the national position is saying don't use it. We're saying it's here if it's available, if it's needed, but it shouldn't be your primary mode. On bus in particular, there'll be 2 steps to that recovery. The first, we've already started to see some fluid adaptations to the network, but the first major change will come on the 1st of June, where we'll step back up to around 70% of our network capacity. There's 3 main components of that. The 2 largest operators are Eva and Stagecoach, and they're supported by a range of other smaller bus operators. It's really important to remember that even though the network capacity will step up, the available patronage capacity will still be significantly reduced because of those social distancing requirements. But there's evidence out there that those messages are being listened to, and we're seeing people doing practical things like spreading the peak, travelling at different times of the day, and just helping us with the overall demand capacity on the network there. And you'll see in our larger bus stations some social distancing measures. You've seen some posters, some tannoy announcements, and one-way systems where it's appropriate. The real key point is our transport network workers won't be able to enforce social distancing. We're asking people, it's about managing it yourselves. So we'll promote it in every way possible, but we're asking for people to be as responsible as they can be. In terms of our rail network, the predominant provider, Merseyrail, they stepped up service yesterday, and we've moved to a 6-car service every 30 minutes on the majority of the network, apart from a couple of lines. After 7 p.m, we'll see those frequencies reduce, and that's simply just to manage what is an ageing fleet. Our new rolling stock isn't in service yet, and we have to be very mindful of that. And we'll see some stations move from a staffed position to unstaffed as we divert staff to manage some of the more complex stations, such as the underground locations. And this, in particular, those underground stations are going to be a challenge for us, and we'll ask for customers' patience as network services ramp up, about allowing more time to access such. Mersey ferries, I won't go into great detail around, but the capacity is there. It's a great way to travel in. It does allow social distancing, even though the capacity has been reduced, and it's probably one of the safer modes of travel in terms of allowing space. And our cross-river services have started with an ability to ramp those up if we need to, if demand is there. And across the highway network, we're seeing more and more car usage. So what we're seeing is a dangerous pattern as people start to return to travel. They think the safest method is car, and that's not a message we want to promote. We need to get people being more active around cycle and walking. We're seeing an increased usage of vehicles, and for that reason we've reintroduced the Mersey Tunnel tolls, but in a very different way, not offering change there and reducing the volume of customer transactions. But key message for us is that active travel is the key mode for us, and we'll continue to work with our local authority partners just to see what we can do in terms of reallocation of roads and widening footways in the short term to promote that. So I'll pass over to you now, and he'll share you a bit more detail around what we're doing to gather some data to help us inform the next phase of that recovery of the transport network. You.
Thanks very much, Gary. I'm conscious of time, Mark and Gary, so I'll be very brief. I might skip a couple of these slides as well. They will be sent out with a pack, so you won't lose anything, don't worry. Gary has described his role very operational and dealing with the immediate recovery. I'm on the policy side of the organisation, and I'm looking at some of the longer term implications that come from this. What does this mean for transport planning? What does this mean for some of our assumptions and so forth? Lots of issues to digest at the moment, but we're starting by looking at some of the evidence that's coming out. We've had a city region transport tracker that's been live for 8 days last week. And what we'll be doing with this is repeating it regularly to get a snapshot of what people are telling us. This isn't the sole source. There are lots of other surveys out through our growth platform colleagues and elsewhere, including some national pieces of research that we're going to be involved with. But I think this particular tracker, we wanted to share this very briefly with you because it shows some really interesting findings. Of the 700 people that completed the survey in that period that you can see there, got some useful views back. So prior to COVID, the pre-COVID days, 3/5 of those respondents had never worked from home. I was in that category myself. Of those who'd never worked from home, over half are now doing so. No surprises there because of lockdown. And really essential shopping and exercise being the main reasons that people are getting out and about at the moment. So encouraging to see there that people are following the guidance. People were travelling for those essential trips, those essential purposes. As colleagues have said, as Gary said, we've seen more walking, we've seen more cycling. That's been a really, really positive trend. And when we ask people about their experience of cycling and walking in lockdown, people talk about how it was safer, quieter, more convivial, and that they felt encouraged to get on their bikes because it was a nicer environment. So next slide, please, Gary. Again, this is summarising a lot of information into just a couple of slides. So this is a snapshot, and we're happy to share more information with you. But we asked people how they might react to COVID, thinking 6 weeks, 6 months, and thinking further ahead. Over half people expect to be working from home more after COVID than pre. But positively, some of these green shoots emerging. A good number expecting to be walking more, particularly drivers who drove 5 days a week are now looking to walk more and cycle more. But we're really picking up this desire locally that people will focus on local journeys, travelling to their village centres, travelling to the shops, travelling to the doctors, to the health centre first and to the city centre before they start thinking about holidays or catching a plane to go on holiday. And I think that's consistent with some of the national messages coming out. What's really clear is the support that's coming from this survey, which is non-representative. I do need to stress that it's a snapshot, it's a picture, but the strong desire coming out there for us to do more around walking, cycling as a means of supporting social distancing. And real encouragement there, as you can see, for proposal to cordon off space outside shops or to cordon off spaces outside the railway stations that Gary touched on, to create safe waiting spaces for people to be able to wait 2 meters apart whilst they're going to collect their takeaway or collect their food or wait to use the bus or the train. And equally, a lot of enthusiasm there for closing off busy thoroughfares to give priority to the pedestrian and to the cyclist, and really for people to be able to move around safely. What's coming out of that survey as well is the real desire for good information. So the green shoots that we've touched on, our Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham has talked about his ambition to build back better from this terrible crisis, and it is a terrible crisis with real, social, health, economic, personal impacts for all of us. But there are some green shoots that we're seeing. There are some positives. And that, for me, in transport policy terms, is around reduction in motorised trips. We're seeing more walking and cycling. We're seeing quieter communities, and we're seeing cleaner air, and we're seeing reductions in carbon, all these being long-term transport policy objectives. And you can see there just an example, that little tweet on the right-hand side, an example of a pop-up cycle lane. This particular one is in Leicester to provide safe access for workers to get to the hospital, and the other sorts of measures that we're looking to roll out here. Thanks, Gary. So this really links now, final points, to our Rethinking Travel campaign and our brand and straplines. You'll see more of these on our website and across the network. Next one, please, Gary. And really, some messages and some simple guides here to reinforce the right behaviours. So we need to all be self-enforcing our social distancing. That's a responsibility for us all, in the same way that we need to be making sure that we are washing our hands, and equally the operators are going through the deep cleansing regimes and keeping the fleets clean. Rethinking travel is a really important part of this, and this links to this slide here. Managing the whole demand for travel considering your options. Do I need to travel at all? Can I work from home? Can I reschedule? Can I go on my bike instead of going on the bus or the train? Not automatically getting back into the car as the default measure, as Gary talked about, because that would not be building back better and in line with our long-standing health, transport and environmental policies. And final one, really. Thanks, Gary. I'm not going to read these out. These are all on the website and they're in the links that we'll follow in a moment. But all of those travel demand messages and what Gary and I have talked about are leading into these key messages now that are guiding the reopening of the transport network. Really, don't travel unless you need to. Leave public transport there as a resource for those that need it most. Walk and cycle, plan ahead, give yourself plenty of time, avoid the peak, consider prepaid ticketing options so you can be as flexible as possible and so forth. And all of us being respectful towards one another. I think that's a really important part of this process. And the final point, thanks Gary, thought the easiest thing would be to share that web link with you. That's a link to the Combined Authority and Merseytravel's website that gives you the very latest information. So things will change, as Gary said, in stages, and all the information will always be on that website and will always be up to date. So keep an eye on that, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Well done, Hugh. Gary, that was a whistle stop again. Excellent. We've just about time to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll jump into our survey. I've had a question from Andy Ruffler. Hi, Andy, known well to us at Growth Platform. Andy's question for probably either you, Hugh, or Gary is: the Mersey represents a physical barrier to regular commuting to Liverpool via cycle, with the ferry probably the most preferred method of crossing rather than the train. But what Andy's asking is, will there be improved infrastructure for cyclists at the ferry terminals and on the ferry itself? Any thoughts about putting that in place to help cyclists on the ferry?
Yeah, so for those that use the Mersey ferry now, very much promote ourselves as cycle friendly. There is ample cycle storage for those that want to leave the bike at the terminals, and there's plenty of room on the vessel for cyclists, so absolutely promote itself, and that's one of the key reasons for bringing the Mersey ferries back into service. And yes is the second answer, in terms of it is cycle friendly, but we are looking at measures we can introduce that actually further promotes that and leading by example. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Another cycling question. This is asked by Sue Brown. Sue's asked you, Gary, will the cycling hubs be placed at all hospital locations?
Okay, so we're working with employers and local authorities at the moment to maximise the impact of those. So in lots of instances, our ask of employers in our stakeholder engagements has been, can we think about cycle storage, secure storage and so on? Clearly, that depends on the volume of employees that you have. So at the major hospitals, there'll be an awful lot of employees. Yes, we are open to working with the NHS. That doesn't mean we've got an unlimited amount of funding we can roll along and actually install them at every employer's. It's about working with them to do that. But there's exactly the type of initiatives we want to introduce, yes. Okay,
I've just one last question. Danny Woodward just sneaked in under the bar there. Just a final one on cycling's obviously hit the nerve here. If successful in the next few weeks or months, could the temporary cycle lanes become permanent?
Okay, so in setting these temporary lanes up, if they are introduced, there's a wider cycling plan already that was in place across the city region, where we are encouraging cycle routes. So strategically, we won't just pick from a straw poll where we introduce these. These are already strategically important networks that we've identified as pop-up. And the vision would be, yes, if then extensively used, they could and could form a permanent solution across the region. I don't know, Hugh, if there's anything you want to add to that.
I was just going to say, we're working closely with our colleagues in the local authorities and Simon O'Brien, who's our walking cycling commissioner that many of you will know, to identify the location of these pop-up facilities, the hubs and so forth. I think one of the big advantages of obviously these temporary measures is that they can be put in place quickly. If they're not working or if there are adverse impacts, they can be changed very quickly. So actually that's going to be really useful in helping us to plan longer term, because as Gary says, we have big ambitions linked to the Mayor's ambitions for much more walking and cycling to cleaner, healthier places where it's easier to walk and cycle. for all those really good reasons. But we're hoping, yes, that these temporary measures will lead the way to more permanent, high-quality walking cycling facilities across the city region.
Sorry, and this is absolutely the last question. It's from Neil Sturmey, who'll be known to many of you from Grant Thornton. Neil, I know, lives in the beautiful village of Burton on the River Dee there. But Neil's asked, for probably on behalf of anyone who's kind of 10 miles plus distance and doesn't fancy a 20-mile round trip cycle to walk to work. Have you got any plans to manage congestion, traffic congestion in the short term, if people are, you know, in that aren't taking bikes or cycling, you know, to work, to manage congestion in and around the city and the pinch points in the short term?
I would say specific plans, no, because our aim would be that we wouldn't want to see congestion. So and certainly flowing through the areas we're responsible for, like Mersey tunnels, yes, the capacity is there to cope with traffic. And it's not that we're saying we would be anti-car, but there are no specific plans to manage congestion. The reality is we want to do everything we can to avoid it, and that's why our messages are promoted as they are being. Now, clearly, there's other modes. If you don't want to cycle from that far, the message is, before people get in the car, we would say, please use the rail network, particularly if as Neil said, he's in early, because at that point in the morning, the train network should have capacity on it. And currently, the patronage levels indicate that that's the case.
Yeah, and very quickly, Mark, because I know time's tight. The reality is most trips are actually very, very short. So this is not suggesting that people who live 15, 20 miles away from their office all need to be getting on a bike. That's not the message. But we realise that most journeys, the vast majority of journeys, are less than 5 miles. Most are actually less than 2 miles. So they are journeys that are perfect for walking or cycling, those trips to the shop and so forth. But as Gary says, this is the importance of making sure that people who are further away from the city or from their workplace can get on the bus and can get on the train in safety. And that's why we'd be asking people to have that hierarchy and be thinking about their trip. And if they can walk or cycle, if that's viable, great, to leave the space for the people that don't have that alternative or that option for a whole host of reasons.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll leave it at that. There's a few more questions coming in, but we're worried that we might lose folks, because we did say we'd try and finish at 4:30. So I've failed miserably as chair this afternoon. Apologies for that. But we just wanted to move quickly into a few questions for you, partly to give us some intelligence about what you're thinking and feeling, partly on the back of what you've heard. Carolyn, can you put the first question on screen? You should be able to just go on screen. It's an audience poll, so just pick which you feel most aligns with your thinking. How much will home working be part of your business in the future? So you've got 5 options to pick for. If you just click on one of those, I'll do that, and then click the submit button. How are we doing, Carolyn? Is that all working?
I don't know.
Are we getting any answers?
Yeah, I think that all the questions have come up at the same time.
Oh, hang on, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So you can't press submit until you've been through. So there's 4 questions. I hadn't realised they come up at the same time. So the first question is how much will home working be part of your business in the future? Second question, if you scroll down, the second question then is, do you envisage you may have reduced your floor plate or office capacity in the future? So there's just 3 options there. Third question, what's your main concern as we move towards fully reopening? And I think we just answer one of those, or we answer more than one. I don't know. Okay, you can answer as many of those as you think are relevant to your views. Okay. And question 4, which is the last question. When it is safe to do so, how do you think you will commute to the workplace? How do you think your commute will change? Hugh and Gary are clearly looking for you to put, I will use the car less, I will cycle to work. But I don't think, I will incorporate walking or cycling more often. I'm sure that's what you're looking to hear, guys. But just put whatever you think.
Okay, we're still getting a few votes coming in, so let's let everyone vote.
Another 10, 20 seconds, and then we'll go to the answers. Okay, and you'll find once you've answered every one of those questions, the submit button will come up blue, and then you can click it and submit the answers. And Carolyn will use a pen and paper and work out all the answers, or it'll be calculated for her. Hopefully,
I'm going to end polling now and share results.
Okay, so answers to those questions. Okay, how much will home working be part of your business? Probably what we would expected is answer B, which is what we've got, a blended mix of home working and being in the workplace. That certainly seems definitely the case, and probably bears out what Neil and all the CBRE team were thinking, that we will see some of that mix. How far that goes into the future will remains to be seen. I think everyone's focused on the next 12 months, I think, if not just the next 12 days. And I think we expect that to be the case. Second question, do you envisage you may reduce your floor plate office capacity in the future? So, Kate, Neil, was that what you would expect? Is that what you're generally picking up, that most won't, but some may, and a lot in the don't know category? Does that feel about right for your talk with clients and stuff at the moment?
Yeah, I think so, Mark. You know, as I think we've already intimated, from business to business, even with, you know, in our own business, different service lines will have different requirements and needs, really, in terms of some that will benefit from being in that collaborative working environment, and others that are quite happily working from home. So yeah, I'm not surprised to see a mixed bag of responses there, really.
Kate, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's just too soon for a lot of people to know, so that they don't know. But yeah, we'll see it change over the next 12 months for sure.
I think that's absolutely right. We're reacting to how we feel right now, aren't we? About, we can envisage, perhaps we've got used to working from home, probably like it in sort of curate's egg. We like bits of it, but not all of it, and we probably like the idea of a blended approach. But when it's completely safe and to do so, hopefully that will happen. Maybe people's view will be very different. Okay, main concern as we move towards fully reopening. Biggest concern is the behaviour of staff and customers. That's really interesting, isn't it? We can do everything that you've laid out brilliantly in your sort of 30-minute slot there on allocating desks and putting signs and dots on the floor and everything else. But the challenge is a cultural one, isn't it? Is how people behave. And I think we've probably all seen that in supermarkets. In some places, you'll see people behaving impeccably and feel very safe. I've been in one or two supermarkets a little close to home here in Oxton, where there's not been much social distancing at all. It's been quite concerning. So that's going to be a real issue. And probably, as much as we have to do the right things on the physical side of the space, there's a lot of education of staff and customers going to be necessary to go alongside that to make sure our environments are safe. Really interesting that's the number one. And interesting too, another big score is the travelling to and from work, to pick up the points that Hugh and Gary have made. And finally, how do you think you'll change? How do you think your commute to work will change? Sadly, Gary, Hugh, the top answer is no change at all. But it's only just 50%, so that means almost 50% will do something different. So I guess that's a result. And you've clearly convinced people, Gary, to get on their bikes and walk more often with your pitch there. So that's all extremely interesting, etc. from Gary Banks to all panelists, but perhaps most people already use the train. Yeah, it's, you know, I think the Merseyrail system, I think, is a fantastic asset that the city region has, and we were all waiting for the arrival of the new network of trains, which sadly, I guess, is the implementation of that is being delayed. Sorry about that. But clearly that's going to be a massively reduced capacity over the course of the coming weeks and months until we get to that point where we don't have to socially distance or physically distance, however we describe it. So we are going to have to find alternatives, and if that lasts long enough, those habits will become hopefully long-lasting habits, because the whole city region could be a better place as a result of that.